It was the Fraser at Fort Mann, where its channel is 2,500 feet wide. While the pipe was being treated, a dredge dug a trench for it 15 feet below the riverbed, and the depth of the water at lowest ebb was around 40 feet. It was in March 1953 that the first section of pipe, its leading end temporarily plugged, was lifted onto dollies rolling on a track. Side boom tractors half towed, half carried the ponderous line to the north side of the Fraser. Like a fabulous serpent, it slithered into the depths. The layer of concrete covering it was 2.5 inches thick to weight it down evenly and to guard against abrasion. On the south side of the river, passers-by gathered to watch the proceedings. And here, a solidly anchored winch wound up a stout cable attached to the forward end of the long pipe section. When that section was nearly paid out, the remaining section was brought into alignment with it. The two sections were now welded into a single string weighing 680,000 pounds. The side boom tractors once again came into play, and the winch on the opposite shore wound in more cable. At last, the entire string lay in its trench, and only a small gap remained to be tied in at either shore. This gap had to be filled in with short, curved joints to conform to the sharply rising bank. To make sure that the line was properly placed, a diver inspected it from one side of the river to the other. Looming through winter fog and nestled in snow, a pump station was taking shape. It was one of 3 being built, at Edmonton and Edson, east of the Rockies, and at Kamloops on the western side. All this time, near Kamloops, hardy bulldozer operators were braving the elements. They were cutting down humps and ridges and smoothing the right-of-way. Before mid-March, pipe laying was again underway. On the Trans Mountain project were more than 100 prime contractors, subcontractors, and suppliers. Canadian firms, manpower, and materials were employed to the fullest possible extent. The principal contractors for the pipeline itself were Comstock Midwestern and Mannix Limited, but substantial mileages were also laid by Anderson International Contractors Limited and Canadian Pipeline Construction Company Limited. Where the ditch was flooded in muskeg areas, sections of pipe were tied together on higher ground and lifted, pushed, and floated into position. Nearly everywhere along the route, the pipe hands were destined to be plagued with wet weather all through the summer. They had to fight their way through swamps and quagmires, which were encountered on both sides of the Rockies. They had to summon all their patience and ingenuity. It was particularly trying with the intricate machinery of the coat and wrap outfit. There were moments when everything looked hopeless, but it was all in the day's work. Tractors were maneuvered to firmer ground. Steel cables were run from them to the bogged-down equipment. In a little while, the procession was underway again. 126 highway crossings and 46 railroad crossings posed special problems. Some were bored through. Others were of the open-cut type. An unusual example of an open-cut crossing was one just east of Edson, Alberta, at a bridge approach, where an excavation 22 feet deep had to be made in the customary mud. Then the pipe, 176 feet long in a protective casing, was laid on the bottom. An integral part of the building of the line was the installation of block valves at intervals of anywhere from 1 to 46 miles, depending on elevation, stream crossings, and other factors. From the beginning to the end of the line, there were about 85 of these big valves. Their initial use was for testing the line, isolating section after section. but in actual operation they would remain open except in emergencies. Besides regular block valves, there were automatic pressure limiting valves at low points to guard the pipe against overloading. As the summer wore on, work advanced rapidly on the pump stations. An important adjunct to the stations west of Edmonton was housing by Bennett & White Construction Company Limited. Eventually, there would be 100 or more comfortable dwellings for operators and their families at the several stations. Except for differences in setting, the stations were all much alike in design. Each was equipped with 3 big diesel engines directly coupled through speed increasers to centrifugal pumps. The Edmonton station would run on 95% natural gas and 5% diesel oil, while the others would burn 100% crude oil taken from the line. At the outset, 3 stations capable of delivering 120,000 barrels per day would be ready for operation at Edmonton, Edson, and Kamloops. These 3 were being built by Mannix Limited. A 4th station was to be completed by Marwell Construction Company Limited at the end of 1953 at Blackpool, 70 miles east of Kamloops. It would step up the capacity of the pipeline to 150,000 barrels per day. The design of the line was such that the rate of delivery could be increased to 200,000 barrels per day with 6 stations, and finally, as demand warranted, to 300,000 per day with 14 stations. As section after section of the line was completed, block valves were opened and water was pumped in for hydrostatic testing. Plenty of water was available, which was fortunate, for just to fill the line, 2 million barrels would be needed. The water came from 4 different sources at convenient intervals along the route. Scrapers were introduced into the line through traps at each of the stations and intermediate points. They ran along at 1.25 miles an hour, cleaning out rust and dirt, pushed by the water, which was pumped in at a rate of 75,000 barrels per day. Later, when the water was replaced by oil, similar scrapers would be run to keep the line free of wax. As soon as each section of line was filled with water, pressure was built up to 125% of what it would be during normal oil pumping operations. The testing period was 12 hours, and in one place the pressure went to 1,425 pounds per square inch. As rapidly as new increments of the pipeline were buried, the trench was backfilled and the right-of-way was restored to its former condition, ready for planting or any other surface use. Farmers were already able to observe that portions of the right-of-way where the line was completed in 1952 were now supporting lush growths of grain, as in the vicinity of Edmonton, and in the valley of the Fraser River, where a typical section was photographed just after the pipeline had been covered over, and again the following year. The only remaining evidences of the subterranean artery for oil were an avenue through the trees and a vent pipe marking a cased road crossing. By early September 1953, the project was nearing completion. In the Vancouver area, an oil loading dock was being built at Westridge on Burrard Inlet to receive consignments for tankers at the westerly extremity of the pipeline system. Greenlease Construction Company Limited erected the dock, and Marwell Construction Company Limited handled the shore facilities. At Burnaby, the great storage tanks were being painted, and their firewalls were being graded. At the Edmonton terminal, too, the tanks were being painted, while the station itself was virtually finished. In fact, it was already pumping oil through the pipeline, oil that was coming in through feeder lines from the discovery field of Leduc, and from Redwater, Joseph Lake, Armina, and Camrose. Sooner or later, all of the other great fields in the Edmonton area would find markets through Trans Mountain: Duhamel, Malmo, Stettler, Fen and Big Valley, Golden Spike and Woodbend, Excelsior, Wizard Lake, and Bonnie Glen.